All right, everyone. So you ever try to learn about cybersecurity and it just feels like every article wants you to be like some kind of coding wizard?
Yeah. Well, that's what we're tackling in this deep dive.
Uh,
We're going deep on reverse shells and how to make them actually work, even when things get a little messy, which, let's be real, they usually do. We're going to be digging into this blog post by Noel Whitehat today, and they get into some seriously cool stuff. And of course, we've got our expert here to help us break it all down. So, when I was reading through this, the thing that really struck me was how often those basic reverse shell commands, they just get completely shut down by security,
it's
right?
like trying to sneak past a watchdog with a big old steak in your hand, you know? Not exactly subtle.
Exactly. And no white hat, they were saying how even in a controlled setting, like with DBWA,
Yeah.
those go-to reverse shells, they just won't cut it.
Right, and it makes sense when you think about it. A reverse shell is basically like this backdoor you're trying to create into a system, right?
You find a weakness, send your command, and boom, you've got access. But the thing is, most security tools nowadays, they're looking for those standard commands, and they shut them down before you can even blink.
So then how do you get around that? I mean, and Noel Whitehat talks about these encoding techniques, and honestly, that's where I started to get a little lost. It's like all of a sudden, everyone's speaking a different language, right? You've got base 64, base 32, hexadecimal, even octal. Can you help us understand like what's actually happening with these encodings?
Yeah, definitely. So think of encoding like, I don't know, using a secret code to make your commands invisible, right?
Sure.
So instead of just sending plain text, which security systems can easily spot, you're transforming it into something they don't recognize. But crucially, your target machine knows how to decode it.
So it's kind of like sending one of those postcards with the, what do they call it, the invisible ink, where it looks blank, but then you shine a special light on it and bam, the message appears.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. And each of these methods, your base 64, base 32, all that, they're like different ways of creating that invisible ink. Some are more common than others, though.
Like base 64, right? That one seems to be everywhere in cybersecurity.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, if everyone's using the same invisible ink, it's not so invisible anymore, is it?
So then it's like the element of surprise is gone.
Right. That's where something like octal encoding comes in. It's way less common, so it's got a better chance of slipping past those security measures that are so focused on the usual suspects.
Ah, so it's about finding that balance, something that's effective but also like under the radar.
Exactly.
Now, Noel Whitehat shows this really cool example of octal encoding in DBWA. And even with the security cranked up to high, they still managed to slip a reverse shell through. So how does that work in practice? What does that actually look like?
Well, they start with a regular bash command, the kind you'd use for a reverse shell.
Hmm.
But instead of sending it as plain text, they get clever and use a combo of Linux commands.
Uh-huh.
They use odd and then pipe it to convert the entire command into octal. So imagine this string of numbers. It looks like something you'd see in a hacker movie, totally unrecognizable as a command.
Okay, so like it's completely disguised. But how does the target system even know what to do with it?
That's where print comes in.
Mm.
On the target system, printf takes that octal encoded string, that bunch of numbers, and translates it back to the original bash command. Like it's a decoder ring.
So those security tools, they see this string of numbers that looks harmless, but it's like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And because it's octal, it just slips right by them.
Exactly. And that's what I love about cybersecurity. It's not always about brute force. It's
Yeah.
about finding these elegant, almost invisible solutions.
Yeah. I can see the potential already, but in the real world, when you're testing a system, you never know what you're going to find. And like, what happens when one encoding method doesn't work? You're back to square one, right?
Not necessarily. That's where Noel Whitehat's next strategy comes in.
Hmm.
Concatenating reverse shells.
Concatenating. That sounds a bit intimidating, like something you'd need a degree in computer science for.
It sounds more complicated than it really is. Instead of just sending one reverse shell command, you string together a bunch of them, each encoded differently, and send them all at once in a single payload.
So it's like having a master key ring. You have all these keys on it. Even if one fails, another one might open the door.
Exactly. Gives you way better chances of success. Even if one or two of those commands get blocked, you've got others ready to go.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually combine those commands, and how do you execute them on the target system?
Noel Whitehat shows us two main methods, using base 64 and, you guessed it, octal.
Let's start with base 64. I'm guessing it involves encoding that whole master keyring all at once.
You got it. They create a text file with a bunch of reverse shell commands.
Hmm.
Bash, Python, Perl, even PHP. They had a whole list.
Okay.
Then they encode that whole file using base64.
So it's like a secret message written in multiple languages disguised with the same invisible ink.
Exactly. And when that base64 encoded payload hits the target system, it gets decoded, revealing the entire list of commands. The system then tries each one until a connection is established.
So even if the target system has some defenses in place, the chances of blocking every single command on that list are pretty slim.
Precisely. Now, using Octal gets even more interesting because, remember, it's less common, so it has a better chance of bypassing those initial security filters.
So how does Null Whitehat make that octal encoded list even more stealthy? Like, how do they use octal with all those different commands?
It's pretty cool, actually. They don't encode the whole thing. They just focus on the key characters within the commands, like spaces and special symbols. Those are usually the giveaways.
So they're like camouflaging the most noticeable parts.
Exactly. The rest of the command they leave is plain text. It blends right in, looks way less suspicious to security tools.
That is pretty clever. It's like they're hiding in plain sight.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing with cybersecurity. It's not just about knowing the technical stuff. It's about thinking like the attacker, you know? Being creative, finding those unexpected solutions.
Right, because the attackers are definitely thinking that way.
Oh, absolutely. They have to be. It's a constant game of chess, right? Trying to outmaneuver each other.
Totally. So, okay, we've covered a lot here with these encoding techniques and this idea of like concatenating reverse shells. It's a lot to digest. What would you say are like the biggest takeaways from all of this?
I think the main thing to remember is you got to be adaptable. Those attackers, they're always coming up with new tricks, so you can't just rely on the same old strategies.
It's like that constant cat and mouse game we were talking about.
Exactly. And it means understanding not just the how, but the why.
Yeah.
It's not just about knowing how to use these techniques, but also why they work and being able to anticipate what the attacker might try next.
So it's almost like you have to think like a detective, right?
A little bit.
You're looking for clues, trying to stay one step ahead.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
You have to be able to analyze the situation, understand the tools and techniques at your disposal, and then come up with a plan of attack, or in this case, a plan of defense.
Well, I have to admit, it is a little daunting, thinking about all the possibilities out there.
Oh, for sure.
It feels like we've just scratched the surface, even just with these encoding techniques.
We've only just begun. Like, we haven't even touched on obfuscation techniques, and those are a whole other world.
Oh, right. So much more to explore. What about all this? Like, what really stands out to you personally?
For me, it's how these techniques really expose the vulnerabilities in a lot of security tools.
Hmm.
you know, because attackers are always looking for those loopholes, right? Those little cracks in the system. And the crazy thing is, a lot of security measures are designed to catch those really obvious common threats.
So it's like they're so busy looking for the front door, they forget about the back window.
Exactly. And the best part, once those loopholes are found, they can be patched, they can be fixed. But the thing is, the cycle just keeps going.
Yeah, so it's like this constant back and forth, a constant evolution.
Exactly. Attackers find a new way in, defenders figure out how to block it, and on it goes. That's cybersecurity for you.
Yes, so it keeps it interesting.
Keeps us all on our toes, for sure.
That's for sure. So, listeners, what about you? What really resonated with you from this deep dive? Any of these encoding techniques get your gears turning, or that concept of concatenating reverse shells? And what other strategies have you seen used to get around security measures? Let us know. Leave us a comment and keep the conversation going. Because we all know knowledge is power, especially in the world of cybersecurity.